there's a 98% chance you've been angered by something in the last 24 hours online. For sanity's sake, we're going to stick to gaming for this one. Just off the top of my head, the last week has seen the Switch 2 reveal get weirdly negative responses and the celebration of the cancellation of some Sony live service games, like a God of War live service game. The Switch 2 is exactly what it sounds like, being a vertical upgrade of the original console, no surprise there. But imagine my surprise when I see complaints about the lack of gimmicks for the console. People complaining this thing is too boring, yearning for the war crime that is the Wii U era. Imagine my surprise seeing people rooting for the downfall of these weird live service games, which, probably wouldn't have been that great, but then we don't realize that corporate just burned the rest of the console generation time-wise and wasted great studios like Bluepoint, who could have been working on a Bloodborne remaster. Constant fighting, constant bickering. It is exhausting to wade through this every single day, sometimes every hour. I don't think the internet was a warm, welcoming place full of sunshine and pancakes ever. At the very least, sometimes we could talk about things civilly, like which Mass Effect 2 romance is the best. Miranda, by the way. Or having console wars, which seem like coughing babies to today's atom bomb arguments. Me making this video itself contributes to the war, and after all, aren't I just getting mad in response to someone else getting mad? Well, yeah. I think there's a real toll being taken on us here. And again, I'm just sticking to the gaming community. I want to really specify that this is not targeted in any way, shape, or form at anyone specifically. I am just discussing the things that I have seen and the things that I have experienced. I am in no way taking sides, whether it be for your side or for their side, whatever that means to you. This is strictly me talking about how the communication on how we talk about games online has broken down severely and why. Why is gaming, of all things, like this? Was it always this bad? Now, before all this, there was plenty of bickering online. I'm not going to try to do some revisionist history and act like we all got along. Sony ponies and Xbox hate each other's guts day in and day out. Pokemon fans couldn't navigate Cerebi.net forums without fighting with Gen 1ers, the guys who think that Pokemon games peaked in Gen 1, which is an insane statement. Then we hit Gamergate, and things went nuclear. Now, understand, I am not going through the entirety of Gamergate, or much of it, if any at all, because that is its own video in and of itself. But this is pretty widely recognized at the start of a pretty major culture shift in the way we talk to each other online. Arguments got more aggressive and even violent. People got doxxed, revealing their real-life names and locations, and Dark Souls players started spamming "get good" anytime you criticized the series. From 2014 through late 2019, things would get hairy from time to time, but there was still kind of an air of unseriousness in most of these discussions. Ninja did a funny rant that became a copy pasta. Hey, that was fun. But every so often, someone would publish a less than glowing review of a game or write an article that made people knee-jerk into rage. These were few and far between by today's standards, happening maybe once a week or even a month in quiet seasons. I think about things like the response to James Stephanie Sterling's Breath of the Wild review, a 7 out of 10, and the amount of vitriol she received was nuts. For my non-American friends, a 7 out of 10 is analogous to a C rating in our school system, which is still passing but leaves room for improvement, which with Breath of the Wild, that's a pretty valid assessment. Fans, I air quote there, of the game DDoSed her website and after posting said review and continued to fill her comment sections for at least the next year over a good, not great score. Now, outside of stuff like that, most of the outrage around these times was usually pointed at the publishers, believe it or not. The Battlefront 2 loot box situation was crazy. Like, basically destroyed loot boxes as we knew it crazy, unless you're FIFA, or 2K, or Genshin, getting off topic. While this is still a lot of anger, it seemed like we were at least mostly centralized in our rage towards the absolutely insane boundaries publishers tried to push throughout the late 2010s. Then a funny year named 2020 happens, and it seems like every single day becomes a new argument. Obviously not all of it was gaming related, but other things were happening after all. I got exhausted fast over the constant bickering on social media. It seemed like every discussion was an argument, threats and insults were thrown left and right. Every single talking point somehow was more important than the last. Our fate, our futures got tied up in yelling over whether or not Last of Us Part 2 was good or bad by their own metrics. This was when I decided to take my first social media cleanse because it was just insufferable. Now we fast forward to yet another funny thing happening in 2022, and now entire accounts and followings are built around brigading and hating. People make a living off of this stuff. It's an entire industry at this point. No effort has been made to reduce the inflammation of these actors, because after all, it's good for business. Now, it's no secret that social media has changed a lot since the early 2010s. As soon as money was found in stoking rage and keeping people mad, every major platform shifted itself to make more and more arguments happen. These websites are all free to use, but this is because high engagement drives high ad revenue. We could also crack open the "is your data being sold" discussion, but I'd rather make that an entire other video. Always remember, if something is free though, you are the product. By keeping users angry at each other, engagement goes up and up. If you need proof, remember again, there is an entire industry running off of pissing people off. It's not just about getting people angry at a thing, it's also about getting them angry at you. As we enter 2020, everyone gets stuck in their homes, gaming explodes as a hobby, and many people who had never gamed or took a long break entered the world. While most people who entered and found new games to play in communities to enjoy and connect in, there is, of course, the people whose parents never hugged them. Such a large community growing in size is going to bring in people from different walks of life, and there's plenty of those people who don't have good intentions or just like pissing people off. There's been some armchair theories that this is a result of people we would classify as bullies who made fun of people for their hobbies in school entering the gaming space and brought their negative personality with them. But that's just a theory. In all seriousness, I'm sure there are a couple of cases of this happen. But I think something else worth talking about while we're in the zone of armchair theories and vibes is that new people in these spaces didn't get the years in the trenches that a lot of us growing up did. NeoGAF and GameFAQs were the forums I frequented, while also frequenting game-specific forums like Cerebi.net for Pokemon and Bungie.net for Halo. While there was plenty of reasonable discussion on there was also just as much chicanery, word of the day, and wading through it is all honestly a big part in why I learned how to articulate my thoughts and develop my views on the games I was playing. YouTube and Reddit added to this because those comment sections were battlefields and people said some things. One of my favorite statements was during the 7th gen console wars, watching someone say, "Oh, they call it an Xbox 360 because you turn 360 degrees around and walk the other way." I feel like I'm a war vet. I don't know if I like this. I and many others did this in our formative years and have learned how to recognize a dookie opinion, or as the kids say now, bait. If you didn't get to work through this on your own, it was going to be really hard to learn when to disengage and when to reject the argument you've given because it's not reasonable. I guess not everyone was as lucky as I was and had no friends and spent all their time on GameFAQs when they were 12. This, combined with the algorithmic surge of anger, means social media use exploded in both engagement metrics and raw anger. Unfortunately, social media has replaced most specific game forums, leaving Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube the main places to get a hold of any real discussion. When everything gets so centralized, it gets hard to avoid the negativity being force-fed to you. Eventually, though, there is a cap. There's only so much you can do with how games are now. Generally speaking, good games are agreed to be good and bad games are agreed to be bad. I want you to compare the response to the Resident Evil 4 remake to the Gollum game. Not really a question of which of these games is a better experience, and don't say Gollum. Okay, that's not funny. So how does a young, enterprising social media app raise the cap on engagement to benefit their shareholders? I see this phrase a lot in online spaces these days. They hate you. They took this from you. Very non-specific. Very pointed without naming anyone or anything in particular. I started seeing this from accounts around the same time American politics forced themselves into the gaming space. Certain traits or aspects of games now belong to specific political ideologies. A game with gay or minority characters is left-leaning, while a game with sexualized women or traditionally masculine men is considered right-leaning. Anyone who actually plays games consistently knows that this rarely has any bearing on whether a game is good or bad. Baldur's Gate 3 is considered the best game of the decade and has tons of characters who are LGBTQ aligned. These kind of discussions tend to come into play around games that aren't really good or popular. Dragon Age The Veilguard, hate that name, has a ton of hate on it, but not because it's a game parading around the corpse of Dragon Age, because it's a character who's non-binary. You can pick a trans option at some point. Now, not really wanting to start the discussion on most of that, I will say that this in the game is very heavy-handed and weak writing. The bad dialogue. And that is one of the many reasons the game isn't really successful or loved. But there's others too, and we're not talking about those very much. I want to compare this to Mass Effect Andromeda back in 2017, which was also a game with mediocre combat, scaled back exploration, dookie writing, and the most character models of all time. We didn't really spend a lot of time hating on it because it was woke, or whatever the phrase will change to next year. We hated it because it was bad. And it bastardized Mass Effect. We can't have discussions around the actual quality of games anymore because one camp will claim the game while the other rejects it. Stellar Blade is a fine game. Has a ton of fan service for people who like that. Yet the game was targeted by leftist-aligned media and pundits while defended by right-aligned. The game is just fine. There's really nothing to write home about one way or the other. But now the very soul of gaming is hinging on Stellar Blade doing well? I find that to be unrealistic. I have one person in one ear and one person in another. There's two. Notice that? How there's always two sides? Don't you find that odd? There's my side, the right side, of course, and their side, the wrong side. Nowhere in there is there any room for alternative opinions or measured out responses. Is the game gay? Is it sexist? Misogynistic? Does it hate you? Do you want to align with the other people who hate them? This duality causes a breakdown of any actual discussion. We genuinely cannot talk about how Suicide Squad was a bad game with bad mechanics, entering a space it had no right entering, led by leadership who misread their ability to make said game, and also it had a dookie story that was finished in a comic book of all things. Rather than discuss most of that, a large chunk of the discussion is based around whether or not a DEI consulting company who didn't really impact the development of the game itself or the systems was involved. By the way, if you need a consulting company or Suicide Squad, you're probably doing diversity wrong. Just if I had to guess. Now, I can imagine the publisher, WB, is very happy to watch us bicker about identity politics rather than to stop and recognize that they made one of the worst games of the year from a former heavyweight developer. This can also have the opposite effect, like with Hogwarts Legacy. Like Stellar Blade, there is nothing wrong with the game. It's a fine game, not for me, but I've also never been a Harry Potter fan. But all the discussions surrounding it boil down to, do you hate trans people? Rather than, it's a mediocre open-world game set in a world by someone who's crazy now but wasn't really when she wrote the books. Every game that comes out in the AAA space now has to pick a side rather than just existing in the context of itself. Space Marine isn't some counter-woke, masculine propaganda. That's just how Space Marines are. Playing Hogwarts Legacy doesn't automatically make you transphobic. Pollute the waters of discussion and inject the fear of the other so it never ends. The arguments will continue to get bigger, people will make their livelihoods off it, and now you have a self-sustaining industry? Oh, well. There's a lot of power in these online spaces fueled by anger of the other. I hope no one plans on abusing that. While we're here, I would like to just clarify that I am in no way hand-waving some of the genuine problematic behavior of members of both communities. Homophobia, racism, sexism, transphobia, these things do exist. They are real. And there are people who feel very strongly that minority groups just shouldn't have a say or shouldn't exist. Obviously, I don't think that most everybody online thinks this way, but the ones that do are certainly very loud about it. Let's just be clear here. Homophobia, sexism, racism, transphobia. These are not issues that gaming really should concern itself with, unless the game itself has something to say about those things. Much like with any writing. Just want to be clear. Now, part of me hopes listening this far has helped some people start to understand what is going on. So here's a couple of things I find help in terms of resetting myself, because even though I'm aware of the system, I even get sucked in from time to time. Unplug. Social media has become a poison, and it doesn't look to be getting any better in 2025. You have to delete the apps from your phone. You can't just screen time your way out of it. Trust me. It'll be hard for a couple of days and feeling like you're missing out on trends or that instant dopamine hit. But once you're out of there, you're going to begin to notice that you're more patient. You're able to hear out ideas. These algorithms are built to farm us, so taking some time out of the barn can make your brain feel better. Start thinking before you reply. This sounds obvious, but take a second and think about what the end goal of what you're about to say is. Is it helpful to anyone but yourself? This will help you steer out of bait, which is meant to piss you off, and engage. Also, don't forget there's a ton of bots and foreign actors that want you to stay upset as well, and they will poke and they will prod. Learn how to say, why should I listen to you? Understand that we are not experts of everything, myself included. There's a reason why I said this is a vibes-based video. I'm going off of what I know and what I've seen. This obviously does not paint the whole story. I don't have data backing me up, so trust me with caution. I try my best to not be wrong, but I'm only human, and my word, and for the record, any content creator's words, should not be gospel. Lastly, do you need to have an opinion on everything? Is it helpful to do that? I like to research topics and try to form an opinion, but there's times where I recognize that I'm not really in need of an opinion on these things. I stopped watching Star Wars content after The Rise of Skywalker and have no opinion on content after, except for Obi-Wan, because Ewan McGregor is my guy. I don't need to watch these shows. I'm not interested in them, and I don't have an opinion on them. I'm not entering spaces to talk about them. This is hard. This is hard. We're looking at years of damage done to the community by bad actors looking to profit. The point I'm making is that we don't have to live like this. We don't have to be the product for some guy who couldn't care less about the game he's talking about or even play it while he's talking about it. If you take nothing else from my video, I need it to be this. You are your own person, capable of thought. Take advantage of that from time to time. You owe it to yourself.
Stayed off Instagram for a month, and my short-term memory got it felt like 30% better. And I realized oh, maybe I'm not getting dementia. I just think my brain is getting scrambled. The amount of times I'm sitting there going put this down, put it down, talk to your wife. You're supposed to be watching this movie with her.